So, welcome everyone to another exciting season of Yale College Voices podcast. My name is Darice Corey, and I'm thrilled to be your host today, guiding you through the captivating stories and diverse voices that make up the vibrant tapestry of Yale College. So, as we embark on season 2 of our podcast journey, we're diving deeper into the rich and dynamic world of Yale College staff members, from advisors to administrators, mentors to mentors. Each individual plays a vital role in shaping the unparalleled experience that is Yale College. So today we have the distinct honor of welcoming a special guest who needs no introduction among the Yale College community, and it's none other than Dean Pericles Lewis. So welcome, Dean Lewis.
Thanks, Darice.
Awesome. So Dean Lewis is a stalwart supporter of our podcast from its inception last year, and we're truly honored to have him join us for the premiere episode of our second season. So throughout this episode, we're going to explore Dean Lewis's remarkable journey, his vision for the future of Yale College, and his unwavering commitment to supporting students and staff alike. Get ready to be inspired as we explore insights and perspectives of one of Yale College's most influential leaders. So thank you again for joining us today, Pericles.
It's really a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Pericles, before we get started, I'm going to share your bio with our listeners for those who have not had the pleasure of meeting you before, and I've had the pleasure of meeting you over this past year and working with you. And I'd just like to share more of your background before we get started.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So Pericles Lewis, Douglas Tracy Smith Professor of Comparative Literature and Professor of English at Yale University, serves as Dean of Yale College, as I said before. In partnership with other university leaders and faculty members, he is responsible for guiding the curriculum, intellectual life, residential experience, and student affairs of the Yale College community. His goal is to ensure that Yale offers the world's best undergraduate education. Dean Lewis earned his Bachelor of Arts with first-class honors in English literature from McGill University in 1990 and his PhD in comparative literature from Stanford University in 1997. After a postdoctoral fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley, he joined the Yale faculty in 1998 as an assistant professor in the comparative literature and English departments, rising to the rank of full professor in 2007. He is the author of 3 books on the social contexts of modern literature and editor of 4 books. He is currently writing a book on liberal education and completing work on the 5th edition of the Norton Anthology of World Literature, for which he serves as the primary editor for the 20th and 21st centuries. From 2012 to 2017, Dean Lewis served as founding president of Yale NUS College, a collaboration between Yale and the National University of Singapore. Under his leadership, the college developed into a thriving model of residential liberal arts education, much admired and studied throughout Asia and the world. From 2017 to 2022, he served as Yale's vice president for global strategy and as a vice provost with responsibility for research on international matters and the support of teaching and learning across campus. In these roles, he was active in planning the launch of the Yale Institute for Global Health, the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs, and the Yale Schwartzman Center. As dean, he reports to the president and provost and oversees all areas of undergraduate education, including admissions and financial aid, curriculum, academic advising, career preparation, fellowships, study abroad, residential life, undergraduate arts, ROTC, as well as special programs in arts and media, directed studies, education studies, journalism, language study, and science and quantitative reasoning. Together with the vice president for university life, he contributes to the university's work in furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion in order to maximize support for all students. He also works closely with the athletic director, the executive director of the Yale Alumni Association, and the deans of Faculty of Arts and Sciences, as well as the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences and the graduate and professional schools. Born in Toronto, Dean Lewis is a dual citizen of the United States and Canada. His wife, Sheila Hayer, is a graduate of the Law School and a former staff attorney at the New Haven Legal Assistance, and teaches at Quinnipiac University Law School in New Haven, Connecticut. Their son is a recent graduate of Yale College, and their daughter is a current Yale undergraduate. So welcome again, Dean Lewis.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction.
Awesome. So again, I'm just fascinated by your bio. I had a hard time trying to figure out, okay, what can I, how can I capture it all and tell more about you, introducing you to our listeners, especially those who have not had a chance to meet you personally. But as I read your bio and realize that you had dual citizenship, my first thought was just to ask you about like where you grew up and if you could tell us a little more about that and how what brought you. I'm not sure if you grew up in Canada, but what brought you from Canada into Connecticut?
Sure. So I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and I was there, the first 18 years of my life. My parents and my sisters and my nieces still live there, although one of my nieces is out on the West Coast now. And I went to college, as you mentioned, at McGill University, and then I came to the U.S. for graduate school. That's where I met my wife. I was at Stanford. And once I got hired to teach at Yale, we moved here, we had our kids, and shortly after we had our kids, I became a U.S. citizen as well as a Canadian citizen.
Great.
So I've been here in the States for well over 30 years, I guess about 34 years now.
Wow. Were there any I know we talked a little bit about it earlier, but in your early years of school, were there certain memories that kind of stand out, like things that really influenced your experience to lead into education?
I think so, yes. So I went to a number of interesting schools over my lifetime, and I've been thinking a lot about those as I've been writing about education the last couple of years. From about the age of 8 to 12 or so, I was in a very progressive school in Toronto, which actually was run by two Americans, Mike and Laura Shine, who were my teachers. And it was a school with about 30 or 40 students in it, in their house. It was called the Walker Avenue School then. Later it was called the Schoolhouse. Subsequently, they retired and the school closed. But that was, as I say, a kind of a progressive education. You called the teachers by their first names. You did a lot of hands-on stuff like baking or being out in nature. But we also read a lot and did a lot of math and that kind of thing. So I think that probably had an impact on my interest in education going forward.
Really? Was there something about like the hands-on that really resonated for you, like or carried out throughout your experience?
I think so. I think mostly that style of education was designed to encourage curiosity and like an interest in learning. I would say I was always a pretty academic, intellectual type of person, so probably my favorite parts were the reading and the math. But I also, we got out there, we played in the fields, we built snow forts and, all kinds of things like that. We had a nice day camp we'd spend a few days at, an overnight camp that we'd spend a few days at every fall, and very nice community. And then subsequently, I went to a school that when I first started there, it's called the University of Toronto Schools, or UTS, struck me as almost the opposite because it seemed very formal. And for example, in my elementary school, we didn't have grades. We called the teachers by their first name. In middle and high school, there was a lot of grading, calling the teachers by their formal names and all of that kind of thing.
Changing out.
But it turned out that actually both schools had been very influenced in the early days by the progressive movement, John Dewey, the laboratory schools at the University of Chicago, and the general idea of encouraging students to learn and to think of themselves as part of a community. And I think that has influenced my educational philosophy ever since.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the themes that came out of our season one, in terms of every guest experience with their early years in school, is having a community and having that sort of second family to fall back on. And was that similar for you? Like,
oh yeah, I think so. Especially the elementary school is very family sort of feeling because we lived in the house. My teachers had 4 kids. They were younger, but they came to school with us.
Oh wow.
The dog was there. I was a little bit afraid of the dog. And then high school was maybe less family-oriented, but it was a very close-knit group. It wasn't a very large school. I think there were about 420 kids, so 70 per year for 6 years. And I still am very close to those friends. I think actually the invention of Facebook and all the other social media means I'm closer to them than I was before the existence of Facebook, because now we all share, memories and news about our kids and all of that kind of thing. So, so I think both of those were very formative experiences for me.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's interesting that you mentioned Facebook, because even for me, there are folks that I lost touch with, 20, 30 years ago. And without Facebook, I never would have reconnected with folks.
Yeah.
So,
there's some downsides to social media, but that's one of the upsides, definitely.
Exactly. Were there specific or maybe influential figures that really stick out in your mind?
Well,
when you think about high school?
I became a literature professor, so I think I do remember the reading courses at elementary school. We had something called public reading and private reading. So private reading, you would sit after lunch and read a book for an hour, and I always loved doing that. And we had a readathon where you kept track of how many books you'd read in a week to raise money for the school library.
I remember that.
And then the public reading was we would sit around and our teacher, Mike, would read us a book and we'd talk about the meaning of it. And that, of course, is very much like what you do when you're a literary critic. And now Mike and Laura are both Americans, and I think I learned a lot about U.S., like the civil rights movement, history, politics. This was the era just after the Vietnam War, and a certain view of what the U.S. was all about from growing up in that kind of environment. Otherwise, my education was mostly very Canadian, and in that sense, sort of parochial. But.
No, that's amazing. Was there, like, during your later years in high school, were there certain achievements that sort of stand out for you, or maybe even just moments where you felt like you really, at that age, you really accomplished or had a major accomplishment?
Well, it was a little bit one of those rather competitive high schools where we were all trying to show off a little, perhaps too much. But I was very involved in debating, and although I didn't win the big championships in debating, I won some prizes for debating, and I was pretty active in it, and I enjoyed that. And I think the public speaking dimension of my work now is part of that. So, if you think about it, reading and writing and speaking are slightly different things, but they're both about language, right? And when I did my PhD, all of that is reading and writing and not so much about the spoken word. But then when you teach a class or when you make a speech or whatever, then the spoken word becomes very important. I would say that over the years, I've turned more to the spoken word, and I still read and write, but not, but I like the oral expression a lot.
Oh, that's great. So what, towards the end of your high school years, and you mentioned that you really enjoyed that part of high school. So did that sort of shape your entire journey into academics, or was there something that just said, yes, this is exactly what I would like to pursue?
That's a great question. I always liked my English classes, and I also was very interested in drama, which is sort of like a branch of English. Like I was in plays, or I was on the stage crew, or I studied plays a lot. And I think that all influenced my decision to study English in university. When did I decide to become an academic? I'm not sure, but I remember there was some kind of expectation, because a lot of my family are lawyers, that I might go to law school. And I do remember having a conversation with my father when I was around 16. And I said I didn't really want to be a lawyer, and he said he could sort of understand that because he was at that stage in his career where he could see why I might prefer to go into academia. So I'm not sure that I decided right away to go into academia, but by the time I was about 20, I was thinking about that.
Interesting. And out of curiosity, what were some of the plays that you performed in?
Well, I remember being a big fan of George Bernard Shaw. I was in a play by Molière called That Scoundrel Scapin in English, and I played a street urchin, so just a kid in 18th century France or 17th century France hanging out on the side. My best part, which was not a great part, was the second pastry chef in The Kitchen by Arnold Wesker, and this was a play set in the back of a restaurant, and I had very small roles, but I was with a lovely guy named Noah Cowan, who was a friend of mine, who was the first pastry chef, and the two of us had little things. And then I was in The Diary of Anne Frank, where I played Mr. Dussel, the dentist. So you can see from all of those roles that I was never the star of any of the plays, but I had sort of fun bit parts in them.
Fun parts, yeah. Um, that's amazing. So, were there specific, moving into your college years, were there certain courses that you really enjoyed, and not just the actual, course material,
Mhm.
but um, maybe the way you interacted with your
Mhm.
professors and just the experience, the in class or lectures, or what stood out for you?
I was very fortunate to have great teachers at McGill.
Hmm.
Um, I think probably one of my favorite classes was actually romantic poetry, and
Oh.
sometimes I think I should have studied romantic poetry for my PhD, but I studied the modern novel, which was another area I really liked a lot. It happened that at that time, which was the late 80s, I think partly because the job market was already getting to be somewhat bad in the
Hmm.
States for people with PhDs in English, a
Hmm.
lot of my teachers had gone to top American schools like Yale or Stanford, and they gave me a bit of the idea of what was it like to go to graduate school. So I remember talking to some faculty. They're probably only 10 or 15 years older than me,
Hmm.
but they were newly teaching at McGill, and they told me, what is it like to study at Yale or Stanford or other places. I wound up doing my PhD at Stanford, but I
Hmm.
always thought about Yale. And then when I finished my PhD, I got a job here.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Yale was at that time a big center for literary criticism. So I read a lot of the criticism that came out of Yale back in the 1980s.
Hmm.
And as I say, my teachers had studied here. So
Right.
I felt kind of a connection as a result of that.
Oh, that's excellent. Were there, in retrospect, were there specific experiences that uh, just contribute to you personally? Like
Mm,
when I think back to,
mm,
English was
mhm.
actually, and I'm not saying this to earn brownie points, but but English was one of my favorite subjects in
Mhm,
college. We explored, especially in African American
mhm.
literature. Um, you know, uh, just a lot of topics that just resonated
Yeah.
for me personally. So were there certain topics that just, I don't know, that you just had a love for, or you found yourself getting lost in reading or the topic? And
Absolutely. Actually, I was really very interested after the Romantics. I came to be very interested in the Middle Ages
mm,
just because they're so different from our time.
hmm.
And especially, I read a lot of Chaucer, and I even taught in a Chaucer class in graduate
Oh,
school.
wow.
But I read like Dante and the other medieval writers.
Hmm.
And there was a little while where I thought I might study that period. And what I
Yeah.
really like about it is like just you have to sort of see the world in a totally different way to imagine
Right.
what it was like to be in the Middle Ages. But there's
Yeah.
also this tremendous sense of humor. Like there are all the jokes in Chaucer,
Hmm.
and even in Dante, there's a lot of humor. And
Hmm.
so I've always followed the Middle Ages and enjoyed that, although I never wound up specializing in it.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And do you find that, like the jokes that
Mm.
you found
Mm.
there, do you find that you pull that into, maybe the way that you teach,
That's a good
or your
question.
teaching
Yeah, I
style?
try and have a sense of humor when I'm teaching. I think, one of the authors I taught a lot when I got to Yale is James Joyce, because a lot of
Oh,
students were interested in James Joyce. And
yeah.
Joyce himself, I once wrote a little bit about Joyce's interest in Dante. So I shouldn't
Mhm,
say that I've never written about the Middle Ages, but
mhm,
Joyce himself, a lot of humor about the body,
mhm, mhm.
sexuality,
Mhm.
bodily functions, and all of
Right,
that kind
right.
of thing. And that a lot of that draws on a certain medieval worldview. And,
Mhm,
Joyce was Catholic, and he's very interested in the history of the Catholic
mhm,
Church. And
mhm.
so I do think that when I think about it, my study of earlier periods really helped me to understand the 20th century writers that wound up being, where I specialized and what I
Right.
taught.
Wow, that's awesome. So I'm curious, kind of taking a step back to your college years
Mm,
and reflecting on that, and now
mm,
today as dean of Yale College, how would you, give advice to
mm,
students when they're pursuing their interests and exploring? And I know that is one of your biggest initiatives
mm.
in terms of, helping students, guiding them on a journey to really explore all that Yale College offers. So, um, what's the first thing that stands out in your mind of your experience, and then what you would tell students today?
That's yeah, a great question. I at McGill and in Canada in those days in general, you had to choose a specialty pretty early. So I had to declare my English major my first week of college.
Oh, wow.
I could have shifted to history or philosophy or some other subject, but I chose English. And as a result, 2/3 of my courses were in English. I learned Italian on the side, and I studied a little bit of philosophy and history and religion, but I would have enjoyed studying more broadly.
Yeah.
So I think a great thing about Yale, and this is the liberal arts system in general in the U.S., but especially the Yale version of it, you spend a year or two exploring a range of subjects. Like, if I'd been here, I would have taken a course in economics. I never did, or I would have done some more math or whatever. And I think that allows you to develop a range of interests. And then within the humanities, I always tell people it's good to both look at things that sort of contributed to yourself, like your culture or your history or whatever, and also look at cultures very different from your own so you can learn something from that. So both, that goes to the Middle Ages thing, like both historically recent stuff and historically distant, to try and understand the diversity of human experience.
Yes.
And I think that's something we have a terrific curriculum for being able to do that here.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. And I love that you brought up diversity of human experience, because I think that, pulling from the studies into just actual, in person, our interactions, it makes a huge difference when you apply your studies to actual life, right? Life experiences. Were there certain interests that you had during that time that like hobbies or things that sort of just brought you joy and relaxation and all of these busy activities that you had?
Yeah, I think my biggest hobby is just listening to music, and I listen to all kinds of music like
really?
pop, jazz,
Mm-hmm.
rock, early rock and roll, Cuban and Latin music,
Oh, nice.
classical music, and I enjoy doing that all the time. I often, if you walk into my office, you'll hear music in the background,
Oh,
and
that's great.
I have my little collections of CDs and
Oh,
other
really?
and
Nice.
recordings and so on.
Mhm.
And when I was young, I used to go to a lot of concerts, although nowadays I find it's a little too loud
Yeah.
for me when I
Oh,
go
I
to a
know,
concert,
right?
So I don't set it at the highest
Yes,
volume
yes.
or whatever. But I'd say that's probably one of my favorite hobbies.
Oh, that's great. What are some of your favorite artists?
Well, I just saw a very good halftime show with Usher, whom I didn't
Yes.
know at all before.
Oh, see,
But
now
he
you're
reminded me of Michael Jackson, and then
Yes,
then he made a
yes.
reference to Michael Jackson. I realized, okay, well, so Michael Jackson is from my time, and
Right,
Prince.
right. Yes,
And
Prince,
David
yes.
Bowie was another one I was a big fan of at the time. And like I say, I sort of love the history of jazz music and all the great standards like the Cole Porter songs and the Gershwin
Right.
songs and all of that kind of thing, and Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald and
Oh,
all
that's
of that.
amazing.
But, almost any period of music I kind of enjoy. One that's a little bit out there, but it connects to my James Joyce interest is Irish folk music. We
Oh,
always had a
really?
lot of Irish folk music going on when I was a kid,
Oh,
and
interesting.
all these songs about how evil the British are and so
Oh,
on. And since the English, some of my ancestors are English, but nonetheless, I do have some Irish ancestors too.
right, right. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting. It's so cool to hear about, your favorite artists, because, that's another topic that has come up in previous episodes where, music connects us, right? Even if we're wherever you are, whatever language you speak or background,
Yeah.
love for music. And even if you didn't see Usher before, hopefully you enjoyed it, or
I
at least
loved
parts
it.
of it, right?
Although I think the most famous halftime show was the Prince one. Where
Yes, yes. I don't know if you know, I'm a huge Prince fan.
Are you?
So.
Oh, good. Well, you're a little younger than me, but
Yes.
same general generation,
Yes,
right?
yes. I always tease people. I'll randomly bring up Prince and talk about Prince for forever if you let me. But yes, I'm a huge fan of Prince. But yes, that's awesome. Is there a certain book or maybe even maybe a movie or something that still resonates for you? Like I find some of my favorite movies I'll watch over and over and over.
Oh,
So I don't know if you
absolutely.
do the same.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Mhm.
Well, for movies, I love The Godfather, and I
Oh,
love a lot
really?
of the classic movies,
Mhm.
But for books, I think probably my favorite book, although it's not one you can read. Well, you could read it over and over again in your lifetime, but it's long. Is
Mhm.
Proust's Remembrance of Things Past, which I
Ah.
first read in English when I was in college, and then I as my French got better, I read it in French, and then later I wrote about it in my dissertation, and I've taught it in the past and so on. And it's a whole panorama of life from France from the late 19th century up through the First World War, told through the eyes of this young man who experiences lots of successes, but also disillusionments and so on, and meets all kinds of interesting people in high society and also people who are not in high society. Just a beautiful novel. And so that's probably the one that's most shaped my way of looking at the world.
Oh, interesting. Um, and was there a specific part that really resonated for you in terms of your view of the world?
Well, I think one of the great things about Proust is his ability to represent what it's like to be a child and to see the world through a child's eyes and to remember how things that grown-ups know about, whether it's politics or sexuality or whatever, how they appear to a child who's sort of innocent and hasn't come to understand them yet entirely. So that's one big theme of his. He also, another big theme is time. So sadly, I went to the memorial service for a colleague who passed away, and I had known her for almost 30 years, and a lot of my old friends who'd been there whom I'd known 30 years ago, my old colleagues were there, and that sense that we exist in time, but sort of in a way the distant past is also present for us at the same time. That always strikes me a lot when I'm at a memorial service or a retirement or those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing, and I'm so sorry about your colleague.
Thank you. Now that I've been here 27 years, I attend a lot of retirement events and a lot of, sadly, but part of the university community that's nice is that, you have a community to attend when somebody passes away.
Right. And everyone comes back together and, there's that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. There were the old grad students there that I hadn't seen in a long time.
Wow,
and it was a lovely event.
Oh, wow. Do you find that, you mentioned how some of your studies and different things shaped your view of life. And I love that you brought up the idea of how children look at the world and their sort of unfiltered view, at least at first when they're not influenced, right, by us adults, and are there some core values that you found, maybe even just early on in carrying on from your childhood that you hold dear, or that really shaped your leadership even here at the college?
That's a wonderful question. I think openness is extremely important, like just willingness to listen, to hear other people, to encounter new experiences. And that also goes with the capacity for personal growth. So one of the things that we say that we're trying to teach our students is how to learn so that they can continue to learn throughout their lifetime. And what I've enjoyed about my work is that, you mentioned that I'd done a few different administrative jobs over the last dozen years or so. Each time there's an opportunity to learn something new. So that's very important. And I'd say another one is equality. I just think recognizing everybody's equality, treating people equally, and that doesn't mean that everybody's exactly the same, but that everybody has equal dignity. That's extremely important. And I think that's a basic principle, for democracy and for how we live together. And then between those goes growth, like just the capacity to develop and expand over the course of your lifetime.
Yeah. It's so important. And you brought up another, like I said, a common theme that has come up in previous episodes where, our equality, but also just how we interact with one another, on a daily basis. And I'm curious, how do you pull all of this together in terms of your approach with whether it's the staff or whoever you come into contact with? Is there something that sort of stands out in your mind with how you carry yourself or interact with people that and we're all not perfect, right?
Sure.
So but maybe there are certain days that you remind yourself of all of these values that you've that have become important to you.
That's a wonderful. Yes, I would sort of summarize it as respect. I think people having respect for one another and also sort of regardless of status. Universities are very hierarchical places, like one
Right.
person's the dean, one person's an assistant
Right.
professor, one's an associate professor, and all of that,
Right.
and the different staff levels and everything. But really, one should respect everybody and the contribution that each person is making. And then to the growth and educational part of it, I think that's very important in thinking about how staff develop at a university, because you want to feel that as a member of the staff of a university, whether you're, a unionized staff worker who's working in an office or in the dining hall, or whether you're a professional, that you have some opportunity to learn and to grow. And I think that is challenging at a university because there's a sort of a bureaucratic structure that goes into running a big place like this.
Right.
But thinking about what are the opportunities for each of our staff to fully develop and to either build on the skills they already have or acquire new skills, that's something I've been trying to emphasize, particularly the last couple of years as dean.
Absolutely. And are there specific, do you have maybe even advice that kind of has guided you through your experiences and from college years to now being dean of Yale College? Were there certain experiences that sort of stand out for you, and you would sort of share that as I don't know, like, here's advice in terms of your journey, whether you become a dean or whether you become a director or whatever your professional journey may be?
Well, I think curiosity is very important, and sort of keeping your eye out for how things work and learning something new in that way. I got very fortunate because I was asked to be involved in setting up Yale NUS College,
Yes.
which is the collaboration with the National University of Singapore that you mentioned at the beginning. And my family and I moved to Singapore and lived
Oh,
there for a few years, hired the initial faculty and staff. And then at that point, I shifted from being mostly about the curriculum and education and the libraries and things that are more research oriented here at Yale to suddenly having to learn about buildings and landscape and finances and so on. And I was in my early 40s, so that's a time when there's some risk that you're going to get into a rut. So I was very fortunate to be able to, to learn a lot at that point. As for advice for people, in their careers, I think learning about the broader university is very important. I think we tend to sort of get stuck in the one office that we're in. So one of the things we've introduced, and the Belonging Committee, which you've been leading or involved in leading, has helped with this, is more education and training for staff as they come into the college to learn not just about the office they're in, but about the whole range of work that the college does. And that's connected to a broader effort for professional development opportunities for all of our staff. Because one of the things I've noticed at different phases, but particularly when I came in as dean, is that there's the risk of getting sort of pigeonholed. Okay, this is the thing you do, and you just sort of stick with it. But there should be opportunity for professional growth for everybody.
I agree, and I think that and I can even speak from my own experience. It's just that it can happen, right? I mean, you get stuck with IT, and some folks assume that maybe you just want to stick with IT, but there are, like you said, there are other opportunities to learn and grow and learn about other parts of the college, or different aspects of what makes Yale College what it is.
That's a great dimension of this podcast because you're doing something new, but you're also introducing all kinds of different people in different parts of the college, and sort of it's not exactly the same as the training dimension I mentioned, but communicating about the mission. So helping people see the whole range of things that we do in Yale College, and of course also in the broader university.
Right.
But it's actually a pretty complex ecosystem just within the college.
Yes. Yeah. It takes there's always something new.
Yeah.
Every day I learn a different part of the university, or whether it's the college or Yale as a whole, and there's always something new to learn about a department or a function or a program, or and that, I think that's what fascinates me the most about working here, is just that there's so much going on, that it's endless, right? It could be an
100%.
endless amount of learning.
So in fact, you mentioned the ROTC at the beginning
Yes.
as one of the things I'm overseeing, and I'm working with colonels and captains in the the Navy and the Air Force, and and the students who are doing it. And this is something I had no experience of before, but it's really been interesting to learn about. And of course, I admire what those folks are doing for our country.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Can you recall, now that you've been with the college for going on 3 years, right?
Two, actually, going on two. Yeah.
It seems like three because we did so much last year. But yes, go. So, were there specific challenges that you found that you don't mind sharing with our
Sure.
listeners?
Yeah. I think the one that I often talk about is like doing things the Yale way. So
Yes.
Yale has been around since 1701, and the
Mhm.
college was the first part of the university because originally it was just called Yale College and it
Okay.
taught only undergraduates.
Mhm.
And sometimes you say, well, why don't we try this? And people say, well, we tried that back in 1982 and it didn't work then. And I'm like, well, it's been 40 years. Maybe it would work this time.
Right. Right.
I'm not even sure that it's any individual person's attitude. It's just sort of a tendency to think that things have to be done a certain way.
Right.
And it turns out that most things we do, you can go and look at how they do it at peer institutions, like, obviously Harvard or Princeton, but also at other great institutions, the great public universities,
Right.
UNC or Michigan or Berkeley or whatever,
Mhm.
or even local schools like Connecticut College or UConn or whatever, and find that, oh, they've actually thought about this before.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
how do we organize orientation? How do we organize registration?
Right.
How can we best teach data science to students? We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And
Yes.
so looking around and comparing is, I think, pretty important.
Yeah, it is, and I'm a big fan of not reinventing the wheel.
Right.
Especially when it comes to technology.
Mhm.
If someone else has already figured out a solution and it's a great solution, I'm all for. I'm a huge fan of, let's just replicate it or do the same thing versus trying to create our own system.
Absolutely. And
Um,
in IT, we have had a bit of a tendency to like make our own thing. So
yes,
we
yes,
learn about all these systems that were
exactly.
invented 35 or 25 years ago.
Yes,
And it turns out there's some more modern way to
there's
do it,
something
but
else.
we've
Yeah,
just sort of got stuck using the old
yeah,
system. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that at least for me, that's been a challenge where, again, change is scary sometimes for folks who have done things a certain way for a long period of time,
Yeah.
and suddenly you introduce this new system, and uh, it's difficult for people to just change gears at times. So, have you found uh, ways, or have you had experiences that sort of helped overcome that kind of obstacle over the last couple of years?
Well, one of the things I set out to do early on was put together our strategic plan.
Hmm.
And that involved, listening sessions and conversations with lots
Right.
of different groups around the college, staff groups, students, faculty.
Hmm.
We have these 4 themes that are in
Right.
it, one of which is strategic mission, which is the one most closely related to what we've been talking about.
Yes.
And I think identifying some shared set of goals for the whole college
Hmm.
and on a 5-year time horizon then allows you to identify annual goals for each group.
Hmm.
And then that in turn allows for more feedback. Because I think sometimes people feel like they're doing their job, but they don't always get all the feedback that they need. So I've been
Hmm.
very intentional about making our cycle of feedback more, uh, let's say, more consistent.
Right. Right.
It's not so much like, you were good, you were bad,
Hmm.
or A
Hmm.
or B or whatever, but more, here are the goals we're working towards. What progress have we made? What obstacles are we facing? How can we make more progress next
Right.
year? And I think thinking about the direction you're heading in is very important for
Yeah.
all kinds of work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think as you know that I wrapped up the Emerge program
Hmm.
last year, and that was a theme that came up multiple times, just in terms of uh, not just feedback, but having more communication in terms of um, what kind, if I'm doing a good job,
Mm.
but also how do I not just do better, but what other areas can I contribute to, like,
Yeah.
or helping staff to see, if I have a particular talent or maybe a
Mhm.
particular interest that maybe I can contribute to these other areas.
Yeah, and how does it fit into the big picture is
How does it fit
important
into
too.
the big
Yeah.
picture?
So a lot of people that I worked with in my previous job as vice president for global strategy went through the Emerge program.
Oh,
And
that's right.
so part of what I was thinking about in setting up our smaller programs in Yale College was to provide a similar opportunity for learning. So just even this orientation program where you hear from each of the senior associate deans means that new staff coming in see how they fit into the bigger picture. And they don't have to be totally new to the university. They could just be transferring from some other part of the university.
Right.
And with your help and the help of others, I've been trying to make the staff meetings also opportunities to sort of see the big picture and help people see where they have an opportunity to contribute.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so important because again, talking about Emerge, that stood out in my mind. We had leaders, university leaders, come in and provide presentations on, here's finance and here's IT or our public affairs. But here's how all of these different units contribute to this, we funnel into this one mission. And it was really interesting to see. And I think it's important for staff to see like that your job matters. Like
Yeah.
it's not just, you're not just coming in and punching a time card,
Yeah.
that everyone's job matters here at Yale College and at the university.
Yeah, my
And
COO she was called Executive Vice President for Administration in Singapore used to say, you're not just hewing stones or chopping up bricks or whatever, you're
right.
building a cathedral, right? So
Yeah.
it says, see your role in the
Whole
big picture.
picture. Yeah. And that really resonated for me because it was when, especially at times when it may be difficult to understand, like why are we doing things a certain way, or why are we being asked to do it this way? But when you see where it, what it contributes to and the overarching, goal, I think is so important. And then it makes sense. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
now I have something to work towards. Um, I'm curious, and again, I'm so happy that you had enough time to come here today and, taking time out of your busy schedule. And it made me think, just this morning when on my way over, how do you juggle your time? Like, how do you, how do you juggle, your many appointments and then your editing and then leading the college? And, what does a day in the life of Pericles look like?
Well, I've got a terrific team, so I can count on people to get things done. And so it's not like I have to do all the work. There's 300 people or roughly working in Yale College and very dedicated people. When I first started in major administration back in Singapore, I did compare it to like being a swimmer and just barely being able to keep your head above the water. But what I realized is when you have a good team, a lot of it is setting goals and clarity about, who's responsible for what. And also recently I've been so I went to a great basketball game. In addition to watching the football game yesterday, I saw we beat Brown in hockey on Friday night.
Nice.
And in a terrific basketball game against Cornell on Saturday. And one of the things I learned that is true for both hockey and basketball is the ability to pass. And you don't want the senior associate deans who report to me just to be passing to me and then I pass it back to another senior associate dean. You want them to be able to pass to each other. So team building exercises that allow people to work, like if the student affairs people need to talk to the academic side, or if the communications people need to talk to the finance side. I should be informed, maybe CC me on the email, but I don't have to be engaged in every single, exercise. And then, in terms of my life, I do have a lot of appointments most days of the week, like, 9 to 5, and then sometimes there's an evening thing. But I usually am able to save Friday for working a little bit on my research, unless I'm giving a talk or something like that. And the summers are actually a great time. So most of the research you were talking about, I just do in the summertime.
Oh, interesting. So in terms of, like you said, building a great team, it's almost like, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of your experience, but you sort of have to have that trust in your team to, maybe even make decisions without CCing you or without
Absolutely.
pulling you into the
Right.
conversation, right? So there
Right.
has to be that sort of trust amongst team members
Yeah.
and just knowing that, everyone's going to, do the right thing, basically.
Yeah.
So have you coming into Yale College, was that something that was a challenge for you, or did you find that you sort of had to g- take time to get to know folks and figure out the lay of the land, I guess, and go from there?
Oh, for sure. I mean, definitely the first 6 months, just getting to know
Mhm.
the senior staff and trying to get to know the staff all through the college.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
although I'm new as a dean, I have been teaching in Yale College
Right.
for 27 years. So I knew some of the
Mhm,
people and I knew some of the issues.
mhm.
Uh, I, you know, everybody is great and works really hard, and we've
Yes,
had
yes.
terrific deans. I think that one of the challenges sometimes was, one office had some set of responsibilities, another office had another set of responsibilities that was
Mhm.
overlapping.
Overlapped, yeah.
So I tried to clarify that. I
Mhm,
redid a little bit of the org chart.
mhm, mhm.
Some people's titles changed. I did new job descriptions for the heads of the residential colleges and the
Right.
deans of the residential colleges, just to clarify.
Mhm.
I think clarity about what people's role is and clarity about where the decision is made, because absolutely
Right.
you're right.
Yeah.
I don't need to be consulted on every decision, but
Right.
sometimes you get to a point where you're like, what should we do? I want to, or at least I want to check with the
Yes,
dean
yes.
if
Right.
this is the right way to go.
Mhm,
And if you've laid out clearly what the goals are, and if people are working well together, then
mhm.
they don't need to be micromanaged.
Right, right. Agreed, agreed. Um, I'm curious, for the future, uh, during your time here as the dean of Yale College, but beyond, like, are there certain goals or aspirations that you have that you don't mind sharing with us?
Sure. I mean, for our students, I think my goal is that we offer the best possible
Yes.
undergraduate education. And I think we already are great in the education we offer. I think we do have to keep innovating. One of my themes is curricular innovation. We have to keep
Yes.
innovating in order to make sure that, for example, we're not behind in data science.
Mhm.
Students want to learn about data. We need to hire the faculty and design the curriculum that will help them learn about that. That doesn't mean
Right.
that they can't be reading Proust or Toni Morrison
Mhm.
or,
Mhm.
literature or medieval history
Mhm.
or whatever, but they also want to be able to learn about things like data science or
Yes.
artificial intelligence or climate
Yes.
change, like current issues.
Right.
And so continuing that orientation is important to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
In terms of staff, I think developing staff, this is a great time for people to pursue their careers because the job market is strong.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
college and the university are growing, so there are new opportunities opening up.
Mhm.
I'm proud that we've got a more diverse staff than we've had in the past. For
Yes.
example, our academic leadership, the deans and heads and associate deans and
Mhm.
assistant deans, are about 40% people of color, which is an
Mhm.
improvement.
Mhm.
I think we've also improved maybe a little more slowly in the directors and the more administrative kind of staff.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is just that a university like Yale, people tend to stay for a very long time.
Mhm.
So it takes a
Yes.
while
It
to
takes a while.
introduce changes. And so if you compare the diversity of the student body, the staff, and the faculty today to
Mhm.
what it was like
Mhm.
when I got here 26 years ago, it's amazing all the
Yeah.
transformation that's happened. And so I hope that we can continue to, look a little bit more like the country
Right.
as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely, and, that's great, and it's funny that you mentioned, people tend to stay for a very long time, but I think it's a great, sign of why it's a wonderful place to work. Uh, I've known a lot of folks who have been here, 20, 30,
Absolutely.
30 years,
Yeah.
and which I find amazing. This is my 16th year
Yeah.
here at the university, and I always joke, that I, I'm I'm here for the duration. I have to
Same
get my
here.
kids through college, and you know,
Right.
but it is. I mean, it is a wonderful place to work, and but it is important, like you said, to sort of have that direction. And,
Hmm.
for some, there are maybe some staff who, for whatever reason, aren't as interested in
Hmm.
professional development. But
Hmm.
then there are those who really do want to continue advancing, and um, it's great to hear about your goals for the future. So I'm wondering if, along those lines, if you could also share some other insights you might have in terms of how we can focus on enhancing our diversity,
Hmm.
inclusion, and equity initiatives, and or maybe ideas that you've come across with other institutions that we could implement here somehow.
Certainly. So I think, the Belonging Committee, which you've been part of, has done a very useful survey, which gives us a baseline of
Yes.
how people have been feeling.
Hmm.
And although the numbers were generally, relatively positive, there were some also very concerning elements there.
Yes.
And that goes to that theme of respect, of just people treating each other with respect. I think that's very
Absolutely.
important.
Hmm.
I think, you know, if you're just talking about American society, in a sense, we're all part of one culture, but there is also an element of cultural understanding of people from different backgrounds, like how
Right.
how do we communicate around issues and so on. And I do think my experience in Singapore was helpful in that regard because there it
Oh,
was very
interesting.
diverse in a
Hmm.
global sense, right? Like I
Right.
was working with Singaporeans and Australians and people from India and people
Hmm.
from Africa. And I think New Haven is,
Yeah.
diverse in its own way. And I think being able to communicate across different, sometimes people have different values. I think we all
Right.
share like some of those values like openness and respect and equality,
Right.
but people also come to things with a different perspective, and being able to understand that is
Hmm.
really important to help
Right.
people develop. And I think as you see, the student body has become much more diverse over the years, which is
Yes.
great. And
Yes.
we do face a challenge there with the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, but we've
Hmm.
taken a
Hmm.
lot of steps to try and maintain diversity in the student body.
Hmm.
We've got growing diversity in the faculty as well. Again, more at the younger levels than at the older levels, but
Hmm.
that's understandable. And then how do we, translate that into a staff context as
Hmm.
well?
Hmm.
I think those are important
Yes.
issues.
Yes. Amazing. I'm curious about, believe it or not, we're almost closing our episode.
Oh gosh, time
So
flies.
it does fly. Um, so Pericles, I'm wondering if you have some advice for our listeners, coming from a university leader.
Hmm.
Do you have advice for those who are just eager to, maximize their experience here at Yale College or at just Yale as a whole? While they're still embracing all of these values that we talked about throughout the recording here. Um, do you have some parting words to share with those people who are just really eager to work on that journey and maybe someday become some type of leader?
Yeah, first of all, I'm just grateful for the incredible work that all of our team, all of our staff do. You saw it particularly during COVID, very challenging time,
Yes,
but people
yes,
remain committed to the institution.
right.
Of course, we have good relations now with the unions, which wasn't true 25
Hmm.
years
Hmm.
ago. And so our unionized staff are also making incredibly important contributions. I think Yale offers actually a pretty good range. You mentioned Emerge, but there's a good
Yes.
range of other training
Hmm.
opportunities for people who want to learn, management skills and so on.
Right.
Personally, I love taking online courses. So,
Hmm.
like, I took a course on accounting and another
Hmm.
one on economics and one on
Yes.
marketing. I won't say it was from a peer institution. It
Right.
wasn't from Yale, but it was online.
Right.
And we have access, everybody with a yale.edu email has access to Coursera, which is one source for those. LinkedIn has great
Right.
courses too. So there are lots of opportunities. And I'd also say, if your time permits, there are
Mhm.
lots of interesting lectures all over campus all the time. It doesn't have to be about management,
Right.
there's a great thing about Italian Americans coming up on March 1st and 2nd. It's
Oh,
about the
wow.
Italian community in New Haven,
Oh, wow.
and it's partly with the
That's
New Haven
interesting.
Museum. And then this week, we're releasing the Yale and Slavery Study, which is a study of the history of African Americans and Indigenous people
Mhm.
and Yale. And so there are just all these opportunities to learn
Right.
about our community,
Mhm.
about historical forces,
Mhm.
or even you might want to go to a talk on sociology or politics or
Yeah.
international relations. So
Right.
there are just all these opportunities to learn when you're in a university community, and
Yes.
I just encourage everyone to take advantage of those.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's one of the things I almost think of Yale almost like New York, being in New York City, there's always something going
Yeah.
on. You could find a range of activities to get involved in or shows or whatever. And the same here at Yale. Like you said, there are courses, there are talks, there are performances, there are, there
Yeah.
is so much.
It's smaller, but it's also easier to get around.
It's
So
small,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's easier to get around and, to take advantage of those opportunities, and many of them are, free of cost.
Hmm.
So, that barrier has been removed for
Hmm.
for folks, which I think is wonderful. Like
Yeah.
I can't wait to visit the Peabody.
Yeah.
Um, because number one, now it's free to the public, and they've finished the renovations, and it's just a wonderful way to connect with the community, but also it's like, wow, we get to see this for free. I mean, it's
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Schwartzman Center. There are lots of
The
great free
Schwartzman,
programs at the
yes.
Schwartzman Center. So,
Yeah, it's amazing. So thank you, Pericles. As we're drawing to the end of our conversation, and I could probably talk to you for another hour, but but we're running out of time. But I just want to extend my deepest gratitude to you, just for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Your passion and your dedication to Yale College and the Yale College community is it's inspiring. And it's just been an honor just to have you as a guest today.
That's very kind of you, Darice, but let me extend my gratitude to you. This podcast is just a great way to get to know our colleagues, and it's just one of the many things you're doing to help link together the staff and faculty and teams of Yale College.
Awesome.
So thank you very much.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. To our listeners, I hope that you found today's episode as enlightening and enriching as I did, and just having the opportunity to get to know Pericles here, has been fantastic, because I don't think we've ever had a chance to just speak one-on-one with any of our deans, or at least not, I have not, I'll say that. And, it's just been a pleasure. I truly appreciate your time, because I know you have a really busy schedule. And I really appreciate your support of the podcast as well. And I'm just excited. I'm so happy to have you as our first guest for season 2, and kicking off our season 2 here, and really excited to just share more stories from our staff, from the rest of the college. And so we're all set today. And again, Pericles, thank you so much for joining us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Darice, and good luck with the rest of season 2.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so to our listeners, I just want to share, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and also SoundCloud, so that you don't miss an episode. So I just want to thank you all again for tuning in. I thank everyone for the support we've had throughout our first season. And until next time, it's continue curiosity, stay inspired, and continue exploring our kaleidoscope of talent that shapes Yale College. So thank you again.